Good evening and welcome to Cooper-Hewitt, and welcome to those of you here and to those of us who are joining us by the live webcast. I'm Sarah Coffin. I'm head of the Product Design and Decorative Arts Department here at Cooper-Hewitt, and I'm also curator of Set in Style, the jewelry of Van Cleef and Arpels, which I hope all of you have had a chance to view, but if not, perhaps after this evening you'll have an even greater interest in doing so. In making the selections for the exhibition, I wanted to include, as part of our design message, the impact that people who are in the public eye have on jewelry design. After all, they're the ones who are most frequently seen, frequently emulated, and so forth. And so it is an important part of design history to include the personalities, but it's also obviously a fun part. In making the selections, I found that I had also wanted to include a fair number of people with an American connection. We are telling the story in another part of the exhibition and throughout by identifying the place in which the piece was made or sold, as to which pieces came from Paris and which came from New York. And I think this is very much an interesting part of the story, because American women, or people buying jewelry for American women, or American women buying jewelry, or people who lived here, very much have a huge role in the archives and the history of Van Cleef and Arpels. And the more I looked, the more I discovered that it was very easy to make a fairly large number of them as part of the concentration. And I think this is an interesting story, because most of these women, many of them, had their own money, and they felt entirely empowered to make these decisions for themselves. And it's clear that, to my eye, it became more clear that the designs that they chose were very much about designs and picking out different jewelry designs, which is why many of them reappeared. Frequently, when the men made the decisions, it was more about buying large rocks or something else to establish how much you were devoted to the person at the time. Obviously, there certainly are exceptions to that rule, but it was very interesting, because as I went around to collectors today, they too showed this tendency. In fact, one of our major lenders, who is a woman who's a very fine jewelry historian, in fact, said that her husband only gave her one piece, and in fact, eventually it went back, because he realized that he was trying to give her something as a sentimental token, and she was collecting the jewelry as design. And after that, I think it was all clear, and it's very clear in her collection. Now, why am I not getting this to go forward? I will just show you a few examples. Daisy Fellows, who was very much a fashionista in Paris in the 20s, was the granddaughter of Isaac Singer of sewing machines, and it was she who bought this pair of manchette bracelets that turn into a choker, actually as two separate items, two sequential bracelets, but in Paris in the 1920s. Florence Gould, who, while she had a house in the south of France, was key to the innovation of the Minaudière, the ultimate compact with everything but the kitchen sink in it, about which all of these things you will hear more later. Whoopsie, I'm sorry, one too far. Barbara Hutton, very much just a small part of the many pieces of jewelry she collected, and in fact appears in Van Cleef and Arpels records with all 7 of her 7 husbands' names. But, I'm just going to give you, we'll come back to a lot of this. Marjorie Merriweather Post and her extraordinarily delicate and also complicated mystery set brooch of 1967 and a pair of diamond briolet earrings. Jackie Kennedy Onassis is represented here by both the Kennedy part, the flamme, and the Onassis part, the cuffs, the Etruscan-style cuffs and earrings. Elizabeth Taylor, about whom you'll hear more later, and certainly a significant jewelry collector. And then, of course, whoopsie, I went too far again, Princess Grace of Monaco, a.k.a. Grace Kelly, and we have actually later down, as is the Duchess of Windsor, again, the mixture of European royalty and American women combining to form great jewelry collections. Marlene Dietrich's extraordinary jarretiere will discuss, and that is very much a story of her really working with the firm to create it. Grace, here we have Princess Grace of Monaco with her engagement set. This was a set with pearls and diamonds bought in New York by Prince Rainier before their wedding in 1956, and something that there are a number of photographs, this being the formal engagement portrait, but that show her in it, and I think it very much associating with her idea of the ice and the pearls and but also the image she had on screen, but also in life. And then we have a separate case for the more fun-loving, casual side, which apparently went along with rooms of similar style to go with it. So we will return to some of these images, but this was just a brief overview of some of the pieces in the exhibition, which when we are talking and discussing some of the personalities, we can get back up on the screen. But without further ado, I really want to introduce Nicolas Luchsinger, who is joining us as the first of the two presenters and then panelists. And Nicolas has been a godsend to me in researching this exhibition because he, like his colleague Catherine Cariou in Paris, opened up their archives to me, and you will see the archives of watercolors, gouaches, and stock books, and retail cards, all on exhibition, which enabled us to be sure that we had the pieces dated entirely correctly and knew their history and their original owners. Recently promoted by Van Cleef Arpels to Vice President of Retail Operation for the Americas, he has been with Van Cleef Arpels for nearly 5 years, and is also director of the New York flagship operation and the Heritage Collection, which he now curates. And previously, he was at Christie's before that. So Nicolas is far better qualified than I to talk to you about some of these personalities, and I will turn the floor over to him.
So I selected a few personalities for tonight's presentation, a few pieces which are in the exhibition, a few pieces which are not in the exhibition. And the pieces I selected and the famous owners of the pieces I selected is, I based my selection of really a kind of a partnership between Van Cleef & Arpels and the owner. Because obviously you have famous people who just walked in the store of Van Cleef & Arpels and happened to buy a necklace, a bracelet they like, or even have been offered a necklace or a ring they liked. But they're also famous owners, and they really came to Van Cleef & Arpels with an idea in their mind or with stones they had, and Van Cleef & Arpels created specific pieces for them. So my first selection is the Maharani of Baroda, whose wonderful necklace is upstairs in the collection. The Maharani of Baroda, she was nicknamed the Wallis Simpson of India. She was the second, yes, she was the second wife of the last Maharaja of Baroda. And he had an amazing collection of stones, which was like from his treasury, from his conquest, and she had these stones mounted by Van Cleef & Arpels most of the time. So here you see a picture of her with her son and Pierre Arpels. And here you see a detail of this one of the highlights of her collection, which is this wonderful necklace which I designed in the 50s for her with old Mughal emeralds. So the emeralds are from the treasury of Baroda. She had it was so mounted in the Indian style. Here you can see the original drawing which we made for her. And she, it was one of the highlights of her collection. She had an interesting and kind of a sad life when she moved to London. She divorced her husband, moved to London, took all the stone and the jewelry with her, which was kind of a scandal because most of the stones were not really belonging to the Maharaja himself, but to the treasury of Baroda, and she should not have been able to take them. She moved to Monaco, where she started to gamble, so she needed money, so she started to sell her jewelry. So it's why you have a lot of jewelry on the auction markets today. And unfortunately, also her son committed suicide. So she really didn't have such a beautiful life, but beautiful jewelry. Second personality I selected is the Princess Fawzia of Egypt. And I love this picture by Cecil Beaton. I think it's a great picture which shows all the glamour of the royal court of Egypt at the time. She was the sister of Farouk, and she was the first wife of the Shah of Iran. So the Shah of Iran married 3 times, and 3 of his wives were big Van Cleef Arpels clients. And we missed the Shah. And the first special order was made for her wedding with the Shah of Iran. So here you see a picture of her wedding in 1939. So we did all the jewelry for her, and we did also all the jewelry for her mother. So here you see the mother with Farouk, and you see an amazing tiara, necklace, and ear pendants. Here you see the drawings for the tiara and the archive and the design. So as Sarah told you, every piece of Van Cleef & Arpels is always signed and numbered. So we had a workshop in Paris since we opened in 1906, and we have a workshop in New York since we opened in the United States in 1939. So both workshops still work today. And with the number which is on the piece, you are able to find all in our archives exactly all the information. When the piece was made, for who it was made. If it's a special order, it's SO if it was made in the United States, or CS, Commande Spéciale, if it was made in Paris. If the number is an NY before the number, you know it was done in our New York workshop. If there's no NY, it was done in our Paris workshop. So it's how you can find all the information. So when somebody brings a piece to us, or Sarah, when we are working together for exhibition, I can always find the original archives and show them to her. And sometimes we have good surprise pieces we don't know, which have a famous provenance, and they show up having a great history. To go back to Fawzia, so she moved to Iran with the Shah of Iran. At the time, the Cairo and the life in Egypt was very glamorous and beautiful, and she didn't like at all the life in Tehran. She had a daughter with the Shah, but then she moved back to Cairo and never came back and divorced the Shah. Then she, during the revolution with Nasser, then she moved to Switzerland, and she's still alive and lives in Lausanne. We don't know, which is my hometown, and we don't know where the jewelry is. I tried to open all the vault of Lausanne, but never found the tiara. But I think it's still in its original condition, what I heard. So there's another drawing of the tiara. So wife number 2 of the Shah of Iran was Soraya, who was half German, half Iranian. You also have a few pieces from her in the exhibition. He had to divorce her. It was the love of her life. He had to divorce her because she couldn't have any children. So she moved to France. And the wife number 3 was Farah Diba. And for Farah Diba, we did what was this amazing crown for the coronation. So she was the first of the wife who was really an empress of Iran. So especially during a ceremony, the Shah was crowned himself and crowned her as well. So here you have a detail of all the jewelry which was made for the ceremony. So what was amazing, so it was the ambassador for Iran came to all the famous jewelers of the Place Vendôme in Paris and says that the Shah was about to crown his wife and to show a few designs. And Van Cleef & Arpels did win the competition. The stones were part of the treasury of Iran and could not be brought to Paris. So they had to be cast one by one, and then the cast sent to Paris. Then the crown done with the casting, transferred to Iran, and then the stone had been set in the vault of the Bank of Iran. So here you see the jewelry which was made for the Empress, and also you see on the left the jewelry which was made for the sisters of the Shah, and also on the right the jewelry which was made for the daughter, the oldest daughter of the Shah, the one he had with Fadia of Egypt. And the day of the coronation, we had a copy reproduced, and we had it on view in our New York store and our Paris store in the window. And here's again, and you see this wonderful old, also a Mughal carved 18th century emerald. So somebody also who was very important for the Maison of Van Cleef Arpels was the Duchess of Windsor. You can all be grateful to her, because without her you would not have witnessed a lovely wedding 2 weeks ago. So she took the heart of the King of England and became a Duchess of Windsor. A big client of Van Cleef Arpels, a lot of special design was made for her. Few pieces that, which unfortunately are not in the exhibition today at the Cooper-Hewitt. Sarah and I tried everything to get them. We failed. Most of them were bought by a private collector, which we don't really had direct contact. We also think that the jewelry is in Switzerland in a vault. We tried many contacts who kind of pretend they know him, but we didn't succeed. So that's a beautiful manchette jarretia bracelet, which she wore for a wedding day. That's an amazing ruby bracelet, which she received also before she became Duchess of Windsor. All the pieces of Van Cleef Arpels made for her, there are always like a signification in their love story, and they're often engraved with a message from the Duke of Windsor. And that's one of the highlights is this beautiful ruby necklace, which was designed twice. So originally it was in a different design, and then she had it remounted by René Slim-Lacaze, who was one of the great designers of Van Cleef Arpels. It's like a cascade of rubies. And that's the copy of the special order book from Paris, where you can see the drawing. Another wonderful pieces in mystery set. And then the zip necklace, which you have several examples in the exhibition. She didn't really own any zip necklace, but she's the one who asked to have one done in the late 30s. And it took Van Cleef Arpels 12 years to realize one. So we had in the 50s the first zip necklace. I guess as all these important clients, she was very impatient and didn't want to wait, so she never bought it herself. But it's still one of the iconic pieces of Van Cleef Arpels, this zip necklace, and you can transfer them from a bracelet to necklace and release the zip. Here again, so that's the kind of archives. When you have the archives, you have like books in New York and you have cards in Paris. So here you see the numbers, which is on the piece. You can see when the piece was made, and we always write by who bought it. So here it was like the king, when he was king, it was 8. So Marlene Dietrich, you saw it before already with this wonderful bracelet, which is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibition. It was also a close relationship she had with Louis Arpels. They designed it together. The stone, the rubies come from a necklace she had before, so she took the rubies out of the necklace and made the bracelet out of it. She wore it in a famous movie called Stage Fright. And here you have the bracelet. Here we are.
Ruth Peltason, who will speak next, is also the author of the chapter in the book, the catalog of the exhibition, Set in Style, and comes to that project very well qualified. Former senior editor and director of design and style books at Harry Abrams, she's the author most recently of a wonderful book called Living Jewels, which indeed describes the materials in such a way, as well as illustrates an extraordinary variety of jewelry using different living materials, that it really informs and at the same time tells the story using some personalities. Likewise, as editor and author in many respects of Elizabeth Taylor, My Love Affair with Jewelry, we can count on her for considerably greater insight into that jewelry collection. Many other literary and speaking accomplishments accompany her written work, and she's currently working on a monograph on David Webb. So without further ado, I will let Ruth take the podium.
Thank you very much. You know, there have been so many women who've really embraced the wearing of fine jewels, and in this country and indeed around the world, and we tried to canvass a number of them in the exhibition and in the catalog. And some of these were women of fame, of wealth, of beauty, or of royalty. In many cases, there were significant overlaps amongst these categories. Americans married men with titles and gained European households and tiaras. Actresses gained fame and gifts of jewelry, and Europeans added to their considerable coffers, especially if those coffers were stamped with a royal coat of arms. All of the women that we've been talking about thus far and that I'm going to show you here exemplify that ineffable, elusive perfume called style. Some of them had an idiosyncratic way of wearing and combining jewelry. Others went for sheer wattage and provenance. And some, such as Elizabeth Taylor, outshone their jewelry by means of indescribably natural beauty. Here in breathless pace, I feel like I'm going to be the man in the FedEx commercial. I'm going to zip through some images, and because we didn't do a perfect dress rehearsal, there will be a few repetitions here. Now, Florence Gould, who you saw in the previous image, made good by, she was a former opera singer. She made good by marrying Frank J. Gould, the railroad magnate. Not only did they move to the Côte d'Azur and turn it into, as they say, a playground for the rich and famous, it was Mrs. Gould who gave birth, as it were, to the Minaudière. Van Cleef and Arpels already had the Nécessaire, but the Minaudière actually is larger. And as we now know, it was designed for Mrs. Gould and women like her who were stylish but could go out on the town at night and have all the things that they needed. Now, what was remarkable about Mrs. Gould is that that didn't stop her. So she just kept buying up little cases from Van Cleef and Arpels. These are just a few images from the various catalogs, the various archive books of Van Cleef. She'd have cigarette cases, powder cases, nécessaires. This amazing compact, which is in the exhibition, I should tell you, there was a tireless worker at Van Cleef who counted the pearls for me, and there are 930 of them, and 130 diamonds in this case. It's just extraordinary. Florence Gould also was the owner of what's called the Blue Princess of 1956. You can read the copy. The center stone was 114.30 carats. You can only imagine, those of you who really know jewelry, just how considerable that was. Now, Daisy Fellows, who you saw a moment ago when Sarah was showing you things, she was born in Paris, the City of Light, in 1890. By the mid-1930s, she was the Paris editor of Harper's Bazaar, and she was already curiously self-styled. For example, when she was presented at court, instead of wearing the customary white, she wore black. And to do so, she had to fake the death of a family member. So it would seem as though she was in mourning. But the other thing she did is that she actually had very few types of clothes. If she liked something like this bias cut sheath gown, she would have it made in a number of colors. So what she did, I mean, Cecil Beaton used to say that she was an example of what he called studied simplicity. But she knew that she could wear gorgeous, big jewelry. She was a huge customer of Van Cleef & Arpels. And so she would wear simple gowns and then let the jewelry do the talking. Sarah showed you this manquette. It was unusual also because it was a deuce. She got one in 26, the other in 1928. She later was gifted with one that was fringed with rubies. Barbara Hutton, America's Poor Little Rich Girl. I mean, there's so much one could say. She's the granddaughter of F.W. Woolworth of five and dime fame. Her father was F.L. Hutton, the founder of the eponymous investment banking firm. And though she never lacked for money, she did indeed lack for love. She was only 5 when her mother committed suicide. At her coming out party, which cost at the time $60,000, her father gave her a single strand of graduated natural pearls. There were 41 in total, which had once belonged to Marie Antoinette. What was the price of that necklace? Does anyone know? It was a cool $1 million. $1 million in around 1930, I think, when her father gave her the necklace. That sort of established these two dichotomies in Hutton's life. She just kept acquiring, well, husbands and jewelry. As you know, she had 7 husbands. Elizabeth Taylor outdid her by 1. She had 8. But she really was never happy. I mean, I deliberately didn't show any older pictures of her because you can see where life just kind of wanes for her. You know, it's a downhill slope. But what was not a downhill slope was the greatness of her collection. By the way, it was Noel Coward who dubbed her America's Poor Little Rich Girl and wrote the lyrics about her in 1925. We think of her for a number of pieces. The Pasha diamond, originally an octagon of 40 carats and owned by King Farouk. Elizabeth Taylor also had a bracelet owned by Farouk. She had a famous emerald tiara that once belonged to the Grand Duchess Vladimir. And like many other famous women with all her husbands, she also could count as having married Cary Grant, which really raised her in my estimation by quite a lot. She had so many pieces of jewelry. It was just extraordinary. At one point, we figured out that over the course of her 7 husbands, she purchased more than 3 dozen pairs of cufflinks from Van Cleef & Arpels. Here's one of her diadems. I found this wonderful thing where Claude Arpels says, you know, at Van Cleef & Arpels, tiaras are always in demand. And he goes on to say that they range anywhere from $20,000 to $300,000. So here we see Brigitte Bardot, and then smaller is Anita Ekberg in the film Paris Holiday in 1958, and she's wearing another sort of diadem. I also love the fact that when I was reading up on the tiaras owned by women who bought them from Van Cleef & Arpels, there was a quote from Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, who once owned a tiara that belonged to the Empress of Austria, and she said, "I find that with 4 bobby pins, I can just hold my tiara in place and then forget that I'm wearing it." You saw the Giretiere. But what I want to point out is that this dress and all the other clothes that Marlene Dietrich wears in Hitchcock's Stage Fright were designed by the great MGM costumer Adrian. Now, Adrian was great for many reasons, but one of them is that he used to say costume is character. That he designed the costume to somehow talk about the character that person was playing. Now, in Stage Fright, Marlene Dietrich plays an actress, Charlotte Inwood, who's accused of murdering her husband. And at one point, when she looks in the mirror and she snaps on this cuff on her wrist, and I look at it as though she's saying to herself, "This is the only handcuff I'll ever wear." And I think that Adrian would agree. This is just happier days with the Duke and Duchess. She's wearing one of the great and many floral brooches that Van Cleef did in the late 30s and 40s. And you can tell, I mean, she's not a tall woman, but you can tell this is of considerable height. I would wager, what, 6 inches maybe, Nicolas? Something like that. Then there's, of course, the great Grace Kelly. She had Breck girl looks. Hitchcock called her a snow-covered volcano. She was known for getting rather involved with all of her leading men. There was Cary Grant there was Gary Cooper in High Noon, Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window. But she always had that smile. No matter what happened, that smile never left her face over all the years. She's wearing a pin at the top, poodle pin, because she had a poodle named Oliver. Here, for one of her royal portraits, she's wearing a diamond lattice bracelet. You saw it briefly in Sarah's images. You saw a gloved hand. And here she's wearing a coral sautoir in 1970. A picture of her with the Arpels in Monaco at the VCA boutique there. This is a fabulous brooch. It was in the Mori show in the show in Japan. It's just extraordinary. You all know that it's really Grace Kelly who made the Alhambra famous in 1968. Well, she obviously had an attraction to these Moroccan motifs, and this, I think, is just a superb, superb piece of design. Then, over the years, so many of these women wearing Van Cleef have graced so many magazine covers. And it's just, it was interesting to me to find these two shots where they're almost in the exact same profile. But, the great beauties of wearing Van Cleef goes on and on. Here's a wonderful Norman Parkinson photograph of Ava Gardner wearing emerald and diamond hanging pendant earrings, and then Hepburn. You just can't miss those eyes. You can't miss it. And then here's the great Catherine Deneuve with Francois Truffaut on the set of The Last Metro. Now, what's interesting for me about this picture is that the story is that she plays an actress, and she and her husband own a theater, and he's Jewish. And this is Nazi-occupied France, so it's 1940 to 1944 or so. So she is hiding her husband in the basement, and she wears, at one point, she's wearing this Belle Helene necklace. So it's really just a couple years off from the accuracy for the time period in which the film is meant to take place. Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, one could go on about her. She is, at this point, Elizabeth is 25. She's in Paris with Mike Todd. She's paying a visit. She's being to the VCA boutique. She's here with Louis Arpels. She just has a very, very warm, intimate, and long-standing relationship with Van Cleef and Arpels. I mean, the face is amazing. Here she is. She's at the Paris Opera with Burton. Now, I want to tell you another funny aside. She's wearing this diadem that she borrowed from Van Cleef to wear to the opera. And around the same time, the famous hairdresser Kenneth once commented on how he felt diadems should be worn and tiaras. And he said, there should be no bangs. It should clear the forehead and simplify the nubbin, which is exactly what's done here. She also had one of the best foreheads I've really ever seen. In profile, it is perfect. These eyes, extraordinary. The reason I show you this, it's a still from Ash Wednesday. She's wearing, she wore almost always her own jewelry in her films. And if she didn't own it before filming, she owned it by the time the film was done. If you look at the VIP, she's wearing some fabulous jewelry by another jeweler, the House of Bulgari. But here is that ring in color. It's phenomenal. It's 8.90 carat ruby. Burton gave it to her. It was at the toe of her Christmas stocking. And he said, you have to root around for it, Elizabeth. And she kept saying, but there's nothing left of my stocking. And he said, well, you have to turn it upside down. I mean, she told me this whole story about it, but there it is. A wonderful picture. Elizabeth really did have these sort of violet blue eyes that morphed depending on what she was wearing. And Scavullo, the great fashion photographer, made, I think, one of the best pictures of Elizabeth sort of mid-stride. As now she is 45. I defy anyone to look like this at 45 today. But she is wearing the great amethyst, kunzite, and diamond suite from Van Cleef, which was a gift from Burton. I mean, it's just yummy. Yummy, more from Burton. Coral, amethyst, and diamonds. Burton is an interesting character in our story. He had an unerring eye for quality. And then we go into a new era. It's Jackie Kennedy. She's at the great dinner at Versailles, 1961, after which her husband, President Kennedy, says, "I am the man who accompanied Jackie Kennedy to Paris, and I'm proud to say so, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself." But now what's happened is that the tiaras have shifted. Now she's taking a brooch and she's putting it in her hair. So the times are changing. This is the great crossover ring that actually Joseph Kennedy bought for his son to give to his bride-to-be, Jackie Kennedy. She remade it a couple years later, just as she remade the White House. She switched out a couple diamonds here, and the information's on the screen for you. Here she is with the Maharani of Jaipur in 1962. She went there with her sister, Lee Radziwill, and now she's wearing a flame and haricot brooch. She's clipped them to her triple strand of pearls. Again, self-styled. This is what we're seeing. These are women who find ways to wear jewelry their own way. Sort of what the Italians would say, mio modo. That's what they're doing. Here she is wearing earrings. This is part of the many wedding presents that Onassis gave her. Ruby and diamond earrings in 1970, an Indian influence necklace, a Etruscan gold cuff. With Muhammad Ali, this is actually at a fundraiser in the Rainbow Room for Robert Kennedy's tennis tournament. And that's all. This is the great Claudia Cardinale, who always looked great in Van Cleef and Arpels. Thank you so much.
You talked about both Florence Gould, who certainly is key, and I think one of the things that interested me about her, and your slide, Ruth, showed it so well, is how many boxes she acquired. I mean, this is another facet. We talk about the jewelry of Van Cleef and Arpels, but we have a nécessaire and a compact, the one that Ruth showed, and then an example of a minaudière. And the minaudière really was also an expression of its time, in the sense that it was no longer just your makeup or your rouge or maybe a lipstick inside. You suddenly, in addition to all of those, the comb, you have cigarettes and cigarette lighter and perhaps a little sneak peek at a watch that you weren't supposed to be wearing or shown looking at. Do you have any sense about, in terms of these personalities, is sort of how many of them would have, let's take the 20s and the pre-war 30s as an example, how many of them sort of pushed social convention based on the objects that you've seen?
Well, I think for one thing, they had the means to do whatever they wanted. And the means gave them tremendous independence. And a lot of them grew up with this wealth, and it's why they were self-styled. It's why they chose a lot of their own jewelry, which you mentioned. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they got it. They would switch out stones. Doris Duke did that all the time. So I think what I started to observe, particularly in this period, is that these women who were, in some regards, maybe we think of them as social butterflies now, were very strong, very demanding, and very exacting on what they wanted to have. And they had the close collaboration, particularly with the Arpels, on a lot of the pieces, didn't they, Nicolas? I mean,
yeah, and the minaudière is a perfect example,
yes.
because,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a story behind it.
Yes.
Like, Florence Gould, she arrived one day to the Van Cleef & Arpels store, and she had like a Lucky Strike cigarette box with inside the lipstick, cigarettes, and Julia Arpels was helping her, was horrified when he saw that, and I said, I will design something for you. And he created the Minaudière, where you have everything an elegant woman of this time needs, as you say, the watch, the lipstick, the comb, in one box.
I think it was a good example of here she is with the eye for luxury objects, and she's sort of perhaps defied them by coming in with a Lucky Strike tin box and saying, have you got a solution? But in fact, it's also a good example of following on tradition, because these boxes often required the kinds of skills that essentially had descended from 18th century snuff box makers and 19th century. And they used the skills, but at the same time, they were being innovative in making new things to go in them and new lifestyle choices. To get back to Ruth's point, I wanted to ask Nicolas about how much the archives document. I certainly saw myself examples of showing where the stones came from. I don't mean geographically, but I mean we supply this, client supplies that. Can you describe some other examples from either the French or the American archives of some of the sort of significant input, shall we say, from the client?
I mean, on boxes is.
No, I don't mean. I meant
never have so much like if to finish the story on boxes, it also. If you look at jewelry, I mean, obviously you have brooch, necklace, ear clips, and the box is really something which gives a lot of creativity to the artists and the jewelers. You can really do something which you cannot do in another piece of jewelry. So it's also why there's so many boxes and why they were so important. And also in the deco time, there were so many different influences that each time there was a new influence arriving to Paris, the thing was to create a box which was appealing to our clients who did collect them. And then if you look in a special orders, yes, you have a lot. I mean, when you look at a painting, an old master painting will be something which we really cherish and which is old, and it will be something which is like a Dutch 16th, 17th century painting. And when you look at a piece of jewelry, when you see a 19th century piece of jewelry, you already marvel that it's in its original condition, because the story of the jewelry is you always transform it. You take your grandmother's stones, you take the stones, bring it. So, I mean, obviously, Van Cleef helped, or perhaps also destroyed masterpieces, because somebody came with a 19th century tiara and we just ripped everything off and took the diamond to do another piece. But that's often the case. And if you look at all Van Cleef and Arpels advertisement, I saw advertisement in the United States and in Paris where we say, bring your own jewelry to Van Cleef and we'll create something new for you.
And that's obviously innovative in its own way, to see a stone set in a completely elaborate setting and to realize that it's a good stone that could function very well in a very modernist setting. Yeah. In fact, if we look, I have to sort of skip through here quite quickly, but we have in the, there's so many things to be seen here, but we have here the Marjorie Merriweather Post image. She is, in fact, in the image where she's older on the right side, seen wearing a tiara that was worn by Marie Louise and descended in the Austrian imperial family, and in fact did go to Van Cleef and Arpels, where each of the emeralds that was in it was identified and labeled and given its history and stated where it came from. But then new jewelry was created and with it, and in turn putting turquoise in instead of the emeralds somewhat gave it an interest. The setting is entirely French Empire, but the turquoise are in fact very much of the moment of the 50s or 60s when Mrs. Post would have worn it. In fact, she gave this piece to the Smithsonian, and it is down in the Smithsonian in Washington. So it's a sort of secondarily sort of in the family here.
Yeah. Also, it was like this, if you look at the story of estate jewelry, now we really appreciate estate jewelry for what they are. And it's fairly new, I would say, that shift happened in the last 20 years. And before, estate jewelry was only appreciated for the value of the stone, which was itself. So if you look at the crown like that, at the time, the value of the emerald was higher than the value of the crown. But today, in today's market, the tiara by itself with the original emerald would be much more expensive or much more valuable than if you separate the emerald or take them out of it.
And speaking of that, I remember seeing that I think one piece, one of the emeralds that was sold at, I believe, Christie's during your era.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the history of, for instance, where one of them went? I mean,
yes, I mean, obviously we took all the emerald out of the tiara and we made jewelry out of them, and one went to Sybil Harrington. So Sybil Harrington made a money. Her husband made a money in Texas in oil, and she was a big donor to the Metropolitan Opera. There is a Sybil Harrington hall, and yes, one of the pieces she had made with this historical emerald. And then you saw also there was also a beautiful picture of Barbara Hatton when she was wearing the emerald of the Grand Duchess Vladimir.
Right. We can go back.
So that also was yeah. So I mean, the emeralds who came from the Grand Duchess Vladimir and were bought by Cartier and sold to Barbara, and then Van Cleef & Arpels remounted them again. And I mean, now, unfortunately, they also were separated, and from time to time you see one appearing on the market.
Exactly. The idea that to have the vision to see the many possibilities of what the stone will do is certainly part of the jeweler's art, and it takes it away. Now, this is not a piece that is in our personalities section because it's such an extraordinary example of the mystery setting, but you will, those of you who've seen the exhibition, you will see that we have a gouache, and you will see that this rather large piece of jewelry, I mean, it is about 5.5 inches long, actually has a mate. And now, would Fakhri Pasha have bought both of them at the beginning, and then they later were separated?
Yes, so he was, his wife was also a sister of Farouk. So when I spoke of Princess Fadzila, Farouk had 3 sisters, and one married Farik Pasha, so it was still a member of the royal Egyptian family. And they were from the beginning, they were a big client of Van Cleef & Arpels. As Ruth says, there is a beautiful bracelet in Elizabeth Taylor collection. And that's also one of the first pieces in Mystery Set. So it's also a great piece. And Mystery Set at the beginning was done in a flat surface, and then after we were able to do it with volume, and that's one of the great pieces which is made with this volume, and that's a beautiful piece. And yes, it was made as a pair, and unfortunately, we don't know what happened to the second one.
I believe it's ended up in a private collection in this country, but I didn't know that until too late for the exhibition. Anyway. But it does exist. So when you see, I wanted to ask Ruth, you talked about Elizabeth Taylor, and in making the selection from her collection for this exhibition, I felt it was important to show the diversity. We have a mystery set pair of earrings that were new when she bought them in 1984, and very soon after wore them to an awards dinner. The left-hand photograph was for the Proust Ball in Paris, which I would like Ruth to describe in more detail in a minute. And then this extraordinary bow knot brooch, which is actually from 1926. So it shows that she was not just buying new things, or that Burton and she and Mike Todd were not buying new things. But this is one of the most extraordinary pieces of jewelry I think I've ever seen, in the sense of there are many pieces of Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry where you find the idea of replicating a fabric or a bow or a ribbon in something as hard as diamonds and platinum. And it really, you feel you could bend the bow on this, and it is a 1926 piece. And then these, which Richard Burton bought for her in 1971, because indeed the amethysts matched the violet of her eyes. So there are a variety of reasons. But going back to the Proust Ball, would you like to describe a little bit about that and who they were with?
Well, Nicolas also knows a lot about it. It was 1951. It was given by the Rothschilds, right? And it was a costume ball. And in Elizabeth's case, she had borrowed this considerable diadem from Van Cleef & Arpels. And she also, she had all sorts of hair pieces, obviously added to her own hair, but What I like is that she's actually wearing a few houses right now. She's got the white jewelry. The diamonds are all Van Cleef largely, but she's also stuck in the center of her upswept do is one of the Bulgari emerald and diamond brooches that Burton bought for her around 1962, 63, when they were shooting Cleopatra in Rome. And she's also wearing one of the bracelets from Bulgari that he got at the same time. But this is a portrait taken by Beaton. Beaton did a number of portraits of Elizabeth in costume. Princess Grace was there, I think.
Yeah. So it was.
She wasn't Princess Grace yet.
No, she was.
She was in the 60s.
See, the ball was given by the Rothschild in their house of Feria, and it was to celebrate the 100 years anniversary of the birth of Marcel Proust. And he wrote his famous book, À la recherche du temps perdu. What's it?
Remembrance of Things Past in
Yes.
English.
Yeah, in English. And all the guests has to be dressed in a
Costume.
In a person from the book. And Elizabeth Taylor here, she's as one of the main characters of the book with the Duchess of Guermantes. And that's how she's dressed, yes.
And didn't they sit with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, or was that at another?
Yeah, no. They were also assisted. Yeah,
so and what did the Duchess of Windsor do for this occasion?
I don't know.
No, I don't know what all the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what they've done for different balls, like for Grace Kelly's 40th, the Scorpion ball, Scorpio ball.
I'm just going to go back because the other to the imagery. You have better imagery for the Duke and Duchess of Windsor than we. Oh, I thought there was another one in here. The image of them dancing with the tie necklace is from a New Year's Eve ball in New York, in fact, and so that was and obviously she would have chosen to wear something that might emulate the period. So were the number of the jewels then borrowed in general from that ball, or did people try to use as?
I mean, if you look at the borrowing jewelry history. I mean, it's interesting. We can speak about it a little bit because what we spoke about, like celebrities and jewelry at the beginning, celebrities were buying their own jewelry. As Ruth was mentioning, Elizabeth Taylor is always wearing her own jewelry in all of her movies, and that's the same with Marlene Dietrich. And it's also why the jewelry of Marlene Dietrich is so large. I mean, that's an example, but she had other jewelry also from other houses, and they're always massive, so you can see them on the screen. So that's the first purpose. Then they went from buying jewelry to borrowing jewelry. So they are asking us if we could, for red carpet events, which obviously is always like a publicity for the house. So, I mean, obviously, we agree to do that, and others as well. And now we are shifting to a new trend, which is having to be paid to wear your jewelry. So not only are they happy to wear your jewelry, you have to pay them, which...
But I will say that when Elizabeth Taylor got the Jean Hirschhold Humanitarian Award, and she wore the daisy necklace,
exactly.
The Marguerite Daisy necklace from Van Cleef and Arpels, she bought it.
Yeah.
She liked it so much.
For the event,
she borrowed it, and then she ended up keeping it.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty good bet that if Elizabeth borrowed, she bought. Right. But she was one of the few stars sort of left who did that.
But now there is 1 or 2 stars who still buy the jewelry, but they are very rare. But it's always funny because sometimes you have like a red carpet event, and when we have a red carpet, obviously we know a little bit in advance who we dress, so what kind of jewelry they will wear, so we can have our press release kind of ready directly when they appear. So we say the dress is by X, the jewelry is by so. And then suddenly appeared a star. We had no idea, and she's all in Van Cleef & Arpels. And suddenly everybody is asking what kind of jewelry it is, and we are like not ready at all. So it's always very funny. And one star came 2 years ago at the Oscar, and she had a Van Cleef & Arpels necklace and ear clips, which she bought, and she had a bracelet from another house. And then everybody was thinking what kind of jewelry it is, and we recognized, you say, oh, the necklace and the eclipse are Van Cleef & Arpels, and all the press release went wrong. So like all our jewelry was Van Cleef & Arpels. Oh. And we had like 2 clients coming to the New York store, we were like this bracelet. We're like, it's not really art. Yeah.
But tell me something, do you find now that some of the celebrities on the red carpet are also asking for more, is there a trend towards where they're wearing more of the heritage, the historic pieces?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And can you gather do you have any sense of what it is they're trying to say about themselves in doing this?
Look at the Julia Roberts picture where she's wearing the sautoir from 1970.
I think it goes also with the fashion. So there is a lot now. It's like acceptable, even trendy to have like a vintage dress. So it goes with this style.
Yeah, they now call it vintage jewelry. This fine jewelry.
Yeah. And obviously there is a big, the pieces from the 70s, like the pieces like Elizabeth Taylor was wearing, like the amethyst sautoir, that's very, very much in fashion today. So they really like to wear that. And perhaps also it's a way from the star to say, yes, I still wear jewelry from Van Cleef & Arpels, but I don't want to look too commercial by wearing something new.
Right. And the other issue is, I suppose, in contemporary world, is it appearing in films, and it was interesting that you should make the point that the Belle Hélène necklace was only, slightly a couple of years later than the actual
I thought
event.
that was great, that they were so closely allied.
And yet it was also really in style. I think at the time the last Metro was made, the necklace was in 1980, I think.
Yeah, she looks she looks utterly appealing wearing it. You would think, I would like to own that, but it's also Catherine Deneuve, so
right.
she's going.
Well, that's what I was
regardless.
going to ask: is do you know from the records whether her appearance wearing that necklace did that? Are there multiples that were, or were there some that were sold in 1980 or 81? I mean.
No. It is only from this time period, and it's not a unique piece, but it's we only did that in the.
Only did it in the 40s. So she was wearing a period piece, not a current production in the time of the film. I see. Okay.
And then if you look at, a very successful movie was The King's Speech.
Yes, I was just about to bring that up.
And The King's Speech, the Duchess of Windsor, at the time not the Duchess of Windsor, she's wearing the zip necklace.
Right.
Which, as I said, she never owned one.
If you see the film, she's dancing in Balmoral, and she's not yet. But of course, it's about right for when she had the idea, came in asking for a necklace that zipped, but not for the date of the production. Right, exactly. And a bit longer, right?
That's the
longer ones coming in later. Were there any other pieces that she was wearing in that film?
She's wearing the Cadnow watch as well.
Yes, the Cadnow being the padlock watch, and there's an example of that owned by Paulette Goddard. I think it's in here.
Yes, we have. We have it in the exhibition.
Right,
and
we have it in the
catalog.
exhibition. Right. I'm just saying. I thought I had a slide.
Yeah, you just.
I just passed it. Yes, it's very, very peculiar. That's odd that happened. And anyway, you can at least actually see it rather better than having it white on white. But the great art of that was, again, in the 30s, it's sort of just starting to possibly, the idea that you're wearing a wristwatch you don't want to admit to. So the only person who knows that it's actually a watch is the wearer. Everybody else sees a wonderful sort of a triangle of diamonds facing them. So it looks like a sort of buckle form watch. Getting back to the other sort of trends in style, do you see of these pieces, there we have the bow again, it's an American who gets a title, and again, obviously we have, I just wanted to, whoopsie, I'm going the wrong way. This is an interesting confluence of events that might tell us a little bit more about popularity of the day. We have a photograph of Doris Duke in her house.
This is Shangri-La.
Called Shangri-La in Hawaii, that she in fact built in 1938, which was the year, I believe, that Van Cleef & Arpels introduced this line of jewelry called Hawaii, which are these sort of small forget-me-not like flowers, but there's real depth in the design. The flowers are all at sort of different levels. Do you know how popular this Hawaii design was in France?
No, it was very popular. I mean, before the Hawaii, as it's red, blue, and white, it was called a bit like the flower of the liberation.
Right.
So it came as the after World War II, obviously, when the.
So it has this whole patriotic aspect to it, which
is conventionally the French and American flags being
it,
same
it was,
color.
it was fantastic, you know.
Yeah.
It was already global, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it became the Hawaii line, which collection, which is like when you have the flower more concentrated.
But these, she didn't purchase, as we discovered. There she is with her husband at the end of their honeymoon, and she's building this house, and they had a year-long honeymoon, and by the end of it, it was the end of their marriage. And
absolutely.
This became very apparent when we saw the archives that it was indeed her.
By the way, Doris Duke and Barbara Hutton, at one point, they did marry the same man.
Right.
Yeah.
Different times, obviously, but yes. But this was the part of the circuit.
Right.
Yeah.
But at any rate, but the fact was that I believe that her lover gave her that in 1938 also. So I mean, it was definitely around before it took on this liberation connotation. But I wanted to get back, since we have, obviously you've shown Egyptian princesses, the Shah, and so forth, and Americans. But tell us a little bit about the French clientele for Van Cleef and Arpels jewelry.
I think the French clientele, they were like more discreet. Mm-hmm. You have like a lot of industrialistic fortune who were big clients of Van Cleef and Arpels. I mean, for example, is like the piece which you have in the exhibition, the emerald, the fantastic emerald necklace, which is in the.
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, this is one that's in the innovation section and not made for a famous personality, and so not identified.
It was part of an amazing single owner collection of a jewelry.
Right.
And it was part of a French family. I would say that the French, they always, as they are today, they're always very worried of the taxes, of like being like robbed, of attracting too much attention of them. So, and wearing jewelry does attract attention of you, does attract attention of the IRS. And that's part of the culture to be more discreet about the jewelry purchase. Mm-hmm. And if you look today at the Van Cleef & Arpels store in Paris, which is one of our flagship store, the French clientele is a very, very small percentage. Mm-hmm. Very small percentage. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly based on our both looking for objects and at the results, I was interested to see that seemed to be fairly consistent. I mean, obviously there are times, but I would have thought that something like the use of a good design, I mean, such as this Hawaii, where you've got an interesting design, but with small stones, would be something that would have appealed on the French market because of the idea that it's not about an enormous rock, but sort of settings. I would like to turn over, I think, to a few questions, but I wanted, before we do that, are there any other thoughts or discussions of any other of the images? There we have the Maharani of Baroda. That was a fascinating. Though there is Princess Saroy of Iran, I was just going to flip through this. This is an example of a brooch purchased by King Baudouin of Belgium, but obviously...
That's also something which is interesting, because also something you discovered in our archives, because it was part of the collection of the Princess of Reti, who was his step mother. And she was a little bit controversial because she married the King of Belgium during World War II. She replaced the Queen Astrid, who was very, very loved by the Belgian people. It was a difficult time for Belgium because it was invaded by Germany, and they decided to do this lavish wedding at this time. And she received flowers from Hitler to congratulate her for the wedding. So she was not very popular in the heart of the Belgians. And there was always these rumors that she was very, very close with her stepson, the King Baudouin, but never really any could prove anything about that. And when you look at the archive, you see that it's King Baudouin who bought it for her. So that's exactly the proof that they were very close indeed.
So that's why, I mean, many of these things have stories. And also, shortly before we went to press Eva Perron jewelry, which we have here, I just wanted to show you what I received to begin with was a photocopy of the 1950s auction with these photocopied images of her bracelet and then of the catalog entry after she had died, and then eventually we got to the pieces. But they basically had sort of not been seen since. And wasn't that true also of Marlene Dietrich's bracelet? I think she wore it in stage fright, and I wondered
if she put it in the vault. She actually never wore it again after stage fright. She put it in a vault, and yet curiously never sold it. It then went up for auction 5 months after her death, at Christie's. Sotheby's, and it sold for $990,000.
But it was interesting. I wondered if you thought that it was the nature of the personality of the character she'd had to play while wearing it, or whether it. But
yeah, I think she was rather secretive and private.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, and then I will turn over questions, I wanted to ask Nicolas, because he's the one who cleverly identified when this portrait of Natasha Gelman was in the Museum of the City of New York, or the Museo del Barrio, I guess, on exhibition. He suddenly noticed that she is indeed wearing the Ludo bracelet, in the painting by Diego Rivera, wearing the Ludo bracelet. Did she have other Van Cleef & Arpels pieces of jewelry that
yes,
she did, that you kept track of? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I know she had quite a jewelry collection.
She has some wonderful art collection. Which
in addition to the art collection, exactly. At any rate, if we have a microphone that's available, Seamus, great.
I always like this. It's funny, but you have like Eva Perón and Diego Rivera, and I always say that Diego Rivera, who was completely communist, painting Natasha Gelman with a Van Cleef & Arpels bracelet.
Right, yes.
And Eva Perón was supporting the people of Argentina, was one of the biggest Van Cleef & Arpels clients, you know?
Yes, so maybe one would gather that maybe one's sense of personal taste is involved, but not of one's personal politics.
Yeah,
and she had her diamond bracelet that actually was a watch. She could sort of, a secret watch. She could sort of flip up and see what time it was.
Right. Anyway, so if people do have questions, I'm going to ask you to wait till the microphone gets to you, because otherwise it's not going to be heard on to the people on the web audience. Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions? Great. No. Well, anyway, Audrey, that's good.
When we see these
wait, sorry.
We see these wonderful photographs of actresses and also socialites wearing this extraordinary jewelry. We saw several magazine covers of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar where the actresses on the cover were wearing fabulous jewelry. This seems to pretty much have gone away. When I watch the Oscars, yes, there are a few women who are wearing beautiful jewelry. For the most part, they're wearing nothing or a little twee pair of diamonds in their ears. Women don't seem to get dressed the way they used to. And do you see this in the way Van Cleef has to design jewelry and the way they sell jewelry? And do you think that we will ever see those glory days again?
No, we, in United States, I mean, if you look at different parts of the world, I mean, obviously we spoke about France, where I would say Europe in general, jewelry is not so much worn. In United States it is, I mean, in a more discreet way perhaps that it used to be, but I mean, if you go to a wedding or private parties in New York or United States, you see amazing jewelry.
Benefits.
I mean, you see that.
I've gone to openings at the opera, and I was very disappointed at what the women were wearing.
And if you look at our, I mean, what Van Cleef & Arpels is selling today, I mean, we have obviously different categories of jewelry. We have what we call bijou, which is like a like the Alhambra, which are iconic jewelry that you saw on a Princess Grace, but we also have like a high jewelry collection. We have unique pieces which are exactly in the same quality and style what we used to be, and that we sell a lot to American clients, a lot to American
Also,
clients.
I mean, just as a segue, Audrey, a lot of the magazine shoots now are all about someone paying to have something featured. So it's about who are your advertisers, who do you have to endorse. So it's not, in those cases, those women are wearing their own jewelry.
Well, that's part of my
And-
point.
and that's-
Are there the women who are buying that kind of jewelry now? Actresses very often had, many of them had their own jewelry and wore them in
Yeah.
movies. And fashion seemed to work more closely with jewelry designers and was featured much more in articles in an editorial way rather than now where it's mostly advertising.
If you really want to know where the dollars are, you can just watch the editorial, look at the editorial shoots in a magazine. And if she's not wearing many accessories, you just know that those sales are going to be soft because they're not pushing the jewelry.
And then what is also what is different is that the set is gone. So before you used to have somebody with like a pair of ruby eclipse, a ruby necklace,
Yes.
a ruby ring, and a ruby bracelet.
You don't have those
You
suites.
don't have
Yeah.
that anymore. The suite, no more.
No, and frankly, I think some people have gotten, since Madoff, I mean, I really think some people have sort of felt that they've sort of retired some of their finest jewelry, at least for now, because they don't want to seem too showy.
Well, this question is a little futuristic. Could you ever imagine a Van Cleef and Arpels cell phone with an Onyx 1 and a Ruby 2?
So I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's a good question because we did a competition in amongst our staff. We said, what should we kind of create today, which should be what the Minaudière or the mystery set was to the time period, and the winner, in fact, did kind of came with a kind of Minaudière with an iPad, cell phone, and something very similar. So I mean, why not? The difficulties would be that technology evolves so quickly. You know, I mean, the cell phone or the iPad which you have today, in 6 months, it will be thinner, it will be bigger the screen, but smaller the machine. So I mean, obviously, jewelry being first, it's such a special order that when you design something in our workshop for the iPad 1, it will be ready for the iPad 6. Because we're not so quick.
Making iPod watches.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely, I think that you have to live with today time. You have to adapt yourself to new technology. We also adapt ourselves to new technology in the way of the way our workshop works, with using like new laser for making our jewelry, or like the way we cut our stones, or new mix of metals, or like we have the new technique of a mystery set as well. So absolutely, you have to evolve, and you have to keep with the trend of the day.
We actually had a very interesting conversation when some of the workmen came here to see the exhibition from the workshop. The men from the workshop came here, and they said that they had to repair a piece from the 30s, and they said it was wonderful because they were very carefully repairing it with the technique that was used in those days, and so they were aware of what what had been learned and what they were doing differently. I mean, it's all still done by hand, but it was the way of setting the stone exactly as it had been, and they were very conscious of the historic periods and the change of the methods of working as well. But also, to answer another part of your question, is that we did actually acquire here in the museum something called the virtue phone, as in object of virtue. It was in our triennial about 6 years ago, and it is in fact with an entire sapphire face. I would have thought for longer usage that probably the idea of a Minaudière with some compartments, where the compartments could effectively be more or less the size one might put a cell phone in, or other technological accessories, and have them nicely encased, or figure out a casing system that would make them into an evening or a bracelet with an evening bag on it or something is probably the way where one doesn't have to adapt with every iteration of the technology, but you still have the casing. But it has been thought about and clearly is a possibility. So, yeah, go ahead. Where's that? No, right next. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the back, and then I'll get you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sure. These extraordinary women who really had the means and the style to buy anything they wanted from anybody, would they have been loyal to just one jeweler, in this case Van Cleef & Arpels, or would they have shopped from numerous different sources? And if they were loyal to just one jeweler, what was it that kept them loyal to that house?
I think you have both. You have different cases. You have, Elizabeth Taylor. She shopped everywhere. So Duchess of Windsor was mostly loyal to Van Cleef & Arpels, but I also beautiful pieces from Cartier. I think everything is in the relationship. It is today, and it was at the time. It's really Van Cleef & Arpels was a family business at the time. With three brothers. We kept a very close relationship with the client. So that's, if you look at the Princess Grace, for example, that's a good example of somebody who was really very loyal to Van Cleef & Arpels. If you look at the jewelry collection.
Well, they were also made court jewelry.
Yeah, you made everything from, she bought everything from the Alhambra to a regal tiara, and that was really because of a relationship.
When the engagement set begins that.
Relationship with Pierre Arpels, who was often in Monaco, always visiting them, very close to them. So that's what you would explain. And then, a woman of taste. She should buy whatever she likes. Obviously you have a certain taste. Different houses have different tastes. You can really recognize a piece, a Bulgari piece from a Van Cleef piece, from a Cartier piece. Sometimes a client is more appealed to one style, but sometimes they like a little bit of everything, so they can mix and match.
I think there was a gentleman down in the back.
I don't want to stand. Hi, I have an anecdote and then a question. You were speaking of the rise in the last 15 to 20 years of borrowed jewelry on the red carpet. I remember a few years ago, Michael Caine, I don't know if it was the year he won or the year he was nominated, but he was on the red carpet with his wife, Shakira, very beautiful. And she's wearing a beautiful diamond necklace. So when one of the people from the media asked her whose it was, she said, mine. But my question is, was the atelier in Paris more involved with the innovative and distinctive pieces than the one in New York? Because it seems most of the figures that you spoke of either lived there or were very European focused.
Before Nicolas answers that, and I'd love to hear your answer, I would want to just give you a little more background. Van Cleef & Arpels in New York first opened extremely briefly in 1929, but at the time of the crash, so there were only a couple of pieces sold. And then again, the family came, there was the World's Fair in 1939, and then they really opened for business shortly thereafter and had pieces that they had brought with them from Paris, but they moved here. It was wartime. The two firms were cut off. The two parts of the firm were cut off by the war, and they were very much dependent on designing and producing, and they had very many times French-trained craftsmen to work with here in New York who'd either emigrated then or in the late teens or sometimes even earlier. So there was a lot of creative design work going on in New York right at the beginning, and the workshop was, in some cases, as in with the Rubels, they were in Paris working with Van Cleef & Arpels there, and in New York. So I think Nicolas's answer may depend somewhat on what period, but also the fact that that there's a good deal of flow back and forth. But I would like to hear what you think of that.
It's a great question. So, as Sarah said, the workshop in New York opened in 1939. So a lot of the innovation and the jewelry you saw in all of presentation was often done before in 1939, and a lot of innovation, like the mystery set, was done before and was done in the Paris workshop. After the war, I mean, there was innovation which was done in the New York workshop. I mean, a good example are the ballerinas, and as Sarah said, it was fairly, I mean, the communication between Europe and United States is not as it is today, where you send an email and you get the answer the next minute. It was much more complicated. So, I mean, it's both sides of the ocean. Paris, meaning Europe, and New York, meaning all United States, evolved a little bit completely separately. They were an exchange in design, because often when something was successful in one continent, they would reproduce it and try it on the other continent, and vice versa. But I mean, the ballerina is a good example. It was designed in United States by Maurice Duvalet, who was a French designer who used to work for Cartier before, and it was a very successful model. And then they saw it was successful in the United States, so they did bring it to Europe, and a few ballerinas were made in the Paris workshop as well.
But the mystery setting continues to this day to be something that, because only a few of the Van Cleef and Arpels workmen, you know, you're talking about the top of the top, can do it, that they have concentrated their efforts and put all of that in Paris, because that was where they developed this, and continue with the successors of the people who need to work with the top-level craftsmen to do that, that they've got that concentrated there. But there are other certainly go on designing in both places. So, and it was very interesting for me. I got to interview Angela Forenza, who arrived in 1943 to Van Cleef and Arpels in New York as a young designer. And in fact, her design for a ring was selected by Louis Arpels to be one of the ones presented to the Duchess of Windsor, which she in fact picked, not an engagement ring, but just a ring to wear. And so that she definitely did design, but as she worked with the placement, indeed, of some of these fashion shoots, she ended up becoming director of advertising and marketing. And she found that one of the reasons she took on that role was that there was a different perception of what would sell in New York versus the Paris perception of what would sell here, and that it worked a lot better for both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, the Arpels were going back and forth as soon as the war was over, and that they were aware and maintaining contacts with clients and so forth. But it was very interesting to see how the designs were worked out, but then for her to help look at which ones were actually going to appeal on this side of the Atlantic and how to present them as well. So I think there is this aspect of a different look. At the same time, you're talking about the same craftsmanship going into it.
Is every piece unique, or are there copies of the same piece?
No, every piece is not. Well, every piece is unique in the sense that it's made of different. I mean, could be made of different stones. But there are multiple versions of certain style, like the flame clips, like the bean clips, and so forth. I mean, those exist in multiple.
Alhambra.
Yeah.
The Alhambra and great numbers.
But every special order is unique.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the special orders that will be not.
If it's commissioned, it's unique.
Commissioned, it will never be reproduced.
And there are some other regular pieces where maybe only one was made, and
because it's so costly, or the goods are so costly.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for just one more question, and then in the back.
Hi. Do you have a patent for this mystery setting? Because I've seen a lot of them made in Bangkok.
No, you are right. You see a lot of made in Bangkok. So it was patented in 1933. So it's out in the public domain. So everybody who wants can do mystery set. But the design are protected. So the one you see in Bangkok is not the mystery set which is done in our Paris workshop, because the one which is done in Bangkok is the stone is just glued. So from an outside eye, you would see it would look the same. But in fact, the real mystery set, the stone is cut a specific way and slide into a rail, and there is no glue at all. It's just hold because of the stone which is on the rail next to each other. The one made in Bangkok is glued. And then if you do in Bangkok cauliflower and mystery set, I mean, unfortunately, yes, you can do your cauliflower and mystery set because it's not protected. If you do the Duchess of Windsor leaf in mystery sets, you cannot because this design is protected by Van Cleef Arpels, and then we can sue you and have you stop producing it or destroying it.
But if you see if you look either on the iPad or on the website or in the exhibition at the film where we videoed the workshop doing the mystery setting, if you watch the degree of skill required to cut each of those stones to exactly match each other, and they have to be the exact same color and intensity and everything else, so there will be this sea of color, but also that they have to be the same size so you can slide them onto the channel that holds them. The skill required for that is so far beyond what most of these people making copies are doing. I mean, maybe there's somebody who has that skill, but if he has that skill, he's able to command a serious amount of money for it. Probably not making pieces where he needs to be working in a secondary environment. I mean, it's a very difficult and expensive process, and if you're going to invest that kind of money and time, and you'd want to have top quality jewels to go with it, because as I said, you have to match the color, that it isn't the sort of thing that somebody would take on doing lightly, because it would still incur a large amount of time and experience. So anyway, I think we have to wrap up. I was going to say, so thank you all for coming, and thanks our two panelists very much.
It's nice to see you again.